Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Stephen Clifford. I'm the chairman of the healthcare group. My pleasure to announce this webinar, which is going to be presented by Rory Reeves and of MEP and Mark Richardson of Troop Bywaters and Anders. The title of the presentation is Mental Health Care Units and the MEP associated MEP considerations. So I'll now hand you over to Rory.
Thanks, Steve. I'll let Mark introduce himself briefly, and then I'll introduce myself.
Thank you, Rory. I'm Mark Richardson. I'm a partner with Troop Bywaters and Anders, or TBNA, and I lead on building performance and sustainability. Alan Newman and Nadi Parperi were going to join today, but unfortunately they couldn't. So I'm the substitute, but I hope I can do a good job.
Thanks, Mark. And I'm Rory Reeves. I'm a director at Medical Architecture, and with fellow colleagues Bob Wills, Leanne Knotts, and Paul Yeomans. I'll just go into a little bit more detail about medical architecture very briefly, I promise, before we get into the presentation. So today I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes, and then Mark's going to speak for about 20 minutes. I'm going to give a broad overview of mental health design. Mark's going to zoom into more detail. So a little bit about medical architecture. We're architects. We specialise in healthcare. We've been working in healthcare for 30 years. We have offices in London and Newcastle. Generally, we work in the UK, but we also work in Europe, Africa, North America, and Australia. We're about 40-person practice of mainly architects, and this is our current spreads of projects. Projects in red are mental health, projects in black are acute and community projects. So mainly projects in the UK, some projects in Ireland, and a couple of projects across the Atlantic. So onto an overview of mental health design from an architectural point of view. I suppose taking a step back, there's been an evolving model of care in terms of how mental health is provided, and really stepping back a couple of hundred years was very much a sense of the institution for mental health, that you went to an institution and you stayed there, and thankfully the model has evolved, and we're looking at, particularly in the UK but also globally, a model of rehabilitation generally. And from where the location of an asylum may have been located in the countryside, away from view, now we're looking at mental health facilities that are very much integrated into the community. One example is Springfield Hospital in South London, which is designed very much around a master plan of houses and parks, and in fact the old asylum being converted into accommodation. And the model of care is very much one of, I suppose, stigma to something far more. We're seeing positive examples and fantastic buildings coming out of the mental health sector. The building on the right by Architeam Architects, really great example of creating a therapeutic environment to encourage rehabilitation. And I suppose one thing I would comment on as an architect who's been working in mental health for 20 years is the amazing effects that design can have on mental health care, and particularly in inpatient units. Certain things are measured, and it's very rewarding to see the impact that a design can have on an existing service before and after it moves into a new facility. And some of these things you see on the screen here may feel a bit unsavoury in terms of restrictive practice or instance of violence, but this is some of the reality of what's experienced potentially on a mental health unit if the environment isn't designed to the best of our ability. So it is very rewarding to see the impact that a design can have. So I'll give you a very quick overview of the types of mental health services that we see focusing in the UK. So there are various levels of acuity of patient or service user. Majority of admissions are adult acute, and that accounts for about 50% or just over 50% of mental health inpatient accommodation. And in addition to that, then there are levels of secure or forensic facilities where patients may be detained because they're deemed a threat to society. And with that is an increased level of security that goes with that. In addition to acuity, there's also specialisms, and we're seeing recently more and more specialisms being accommodated for example, autism and learning disabilities, perinatal services, eating disorders, and it's good to see that, and a recognition that not all service users are the same, and as well as a separate group, which is child and adolescent mental health. So over the last 40 years or so, we've seen a dramatic decrease in the number of beds available in the UK. Now, some might say, oh, this is dreadful. There's less facilities, but this really reflects a change in the model of care in this country, one where active community care keeps people out of inpatient units, and surely that's a positive thing. And this reduced number of beds that's required, let's say, is reliant on a continued proactive care in the community. The irony of what I would say is a positive line in the diagram here is that the inpatient units that we are having to design for those patients that can't be treated in the community are therefore for inpatients that may be more challenging in their behaviour. So the irony of a success story, let's say, in terms of the success of care in the community, is that inpatient units need to be more robust as a result. So just a quick overview of compliance and guidance. Health building notes form a really key set of documents to be complying to, and that includes HBN 0301 for adult mental health units. That was last released in 2013, and then in 2015, health building note came along 0802 for dementia-friendly environments, and then in 2017, HBN came along 0302 for children and adolescent mental health services. Just a note about what's happening right now. So a couple of supplements to HBN 0301 and 0302 were released at the end of last year for medium and low secure facilities for both adult and children and young people. And in the pipeline, NHS England are commissioning at the moment rewrites of those three core documents that were released almost from 10 to 6 years ago. So watch this space. Another aspect of compliance is CQC's inspections of healthcare facilities, and 5 criteria you may or may not be aware of: safe, effective caring, responding to people's needs, and well-led. I suppose when it comes to mental health, what the main focus appears to be about safety, and there's some key measurables that CQC inspections do look at, and that includes adequate gender separation and very significantly omission or as reduced as possible ligature points. More on that in a second. And also another interesting measurable is the declining numbers of nurses working in inpatient settings. Behind that suggests that there is an issue with recruitment of staff in healthcare facilities, and what can we do as designers to make those environments attractive places to work. Guidance doesn't stop there. Design in mental health network is a fantastic organisation. It's a network, and it has a resource of guidance, which includes these represent some, not all, of the guidance available. It also has a conference in June. It will be in Manchester. I recommend, if interested, do attend. As well as this suite of guidance, there are also other documents which sit outside HBNs. For example, the current medium secure environmental design guide, which is very useful bit of documentation. And that's not exhaustive, but certainly a helpful starting point. So let's go on to some of the functional requirements to start with. Of mental health requirements. I mentioned safety before. Suicide is a real issue in mental health inpatient units. Recent stats suggested there were 70 deaths recorded in mental health inpatient units last year, and this is a chief concern. And if we're talking about NHS Trust, they have a duty of care to look after the patients within their care who may have a diminished sense of responsibility and also suicidal thoughts. One of the highest causes of suicide is through strangulation, and therefore ligature, as in a point that someone can strangulate from, is a key concern and should be eliminated as far as possible within a mental health environment. And that includes not just the ligature itself, but also providing the means to do that. With patients who may be suicidally inclined, people with time on their hands, it requires very careful design in order to eliminate as far as possible these opportunities. But as well as that, there are other concerns that we need to address. For example, other forms of self-harm and damaging or requiring elements that might form weapons that patients may use as a weapon against others as well as themselves. So, for example, you can well imagine electrical sockets need to be robust so that a patient can't access cables behind that socket, for example. What we tend to do in our mental health design is zone an inpatient unit to make sure that we're treating spaces in an appropriate way. Obviously, if a patient is on their own in their bedroom or their own ensuite, then that represents a significant risk because they're unobserved. But there are areas that are passively observed, such as corridors or day spaces, depending on good observation, and also staff spaces. Obviously, there's a lesser need. And I'll come on to creating a therapeutic environment. It's important that spaces are appropriate to the level of risk, and it requires a careful thought and application. Observation goes hand in hand with good safety. There can be, let's say, I'd say this to the audience, an over-reliance on CCTV, but that has dangers in itself. It means that someone is having to look at those monitors to monitor patients. As architects, we try to create a very transparent environment, so to promote good passive observation throughout a unit. And with that comes the benefits of allowing good daylight and views as well. Robustness is incredibly important. I mentioned the fact that once the building or fixtures can be damaged, then they can be used as weapons or a means for self-harm. And there's some very good guidance, starting with the environmental design guide, of a systematic way of testing components before they're installed within a mental health environment. And recently, published was Informed Choices, which is a more refined form of testing of components with a view to their appropriateness in mental health, and with more and more components being pre-tested, and therefore each individual project not needing to test again and again the same product to satisfy a trust, for example, that that product is appropriate. So I recommend looking at both of these documents. And of course, within a mental health environment, specialist products have evolved. Here's just a handful from the anti-ligature shop, which, whilst all of these examples do address a certain needs of either being more robust or eliminating ligature, I do recommend caution is applied in that when fittings are selected, it helps leads to the support of creating a therapeutic environment that, let's say, the anti-ligature and robust properties are not so evident. So a plethora of stainless steel throughout a unit sends a certain message across. A rash of anti-tamper screw fittings send a certain message to the patient that they're in a unit that they can't be trusted within. So I do recommend that we as a design team try and integrate requirements. Security, of course, there's a need for greater levels of security with the greater acuity of patient and service user. But as an architect, we try to integrate these requirements as much as possible, so it's not so evident. One example is fences. This is a facility in just completed in County Dublin, the National Forensic Mental Health Hospital, and there is a 5-point fence around this facility. Not, I'd say that you can see that particularly well because of the careful integration of fences in a way that they're done discreetly and, if possible, eliminated, along with other overt examples of security. In terms of making sure the facility works efficiently and effectively from a servicing point of view, there's certain considerations. It's of great value to enable maintenance to happen discreetly, and what we try to do, and I think Mark will elaborate on this in his presentation, is take service access, for example, out of the bedroom, so it's accessible from the corridor. In another schemes, we've provided a service walkway on effectively a first floor, so access is completely separate on a different floor, effectively from a ward environment. That works particularly well on a single story ward arrangement. But that's just one side of things. Creating a therapeutic environment is really important. And just some prompts really about what that means. Good daylight. That's our job, to make sure that together that we create good daylight into a space. And we can talk about circadian rhythms, but what's paramount, I think, is providing that connection with daylight and the time of the day in the first place. Views and connections to the outdoor space, and what that means maybe from a servicing point of view is, we try to create secure outdoor spaces. The image on the right shows a courtyard where outdoor space is enclosed by the building itself, so there's no fences that enclose that space. It's secure. One consideration is, where's the plants? What's the sound from that plant? Is it going to interfere with the enjoyment of that courtyard? I think careful location and attenuation of plant space is really, really important. Privacy and dignity. Where in terms of private spaces like bedrooms, where's the view out? How can we direct views? But also in terms of zoning, where do we locate more private facilities? We try to avoid activities taking place outside bedrooms, so that zoning works well. And also that from a service and access point of view, we try to separate access for services and maintenance away from the day-to-day activity of a ward so that we don't, amongst other things, create unnecessary interference. And then in terms of feeling valued, really important that the quality of finishes and that the building stays in a good condition. So it's important that we design for longevity, and as well as creating a calm and contemplative space. If we have good acoustics and a space is adequately sized so that people feel like there's a generosity of space, then more often than not, situations won't escalate, but they can so easily escalate in an environment where the acoustics are poor or the space is inadequate. Sensory stimulation, in terms of integrating art or lighting, and that's particularly of interest in accommodation for people with learning disabilities. But also there's a flip side to that, in particularly in units for people with autism, where we have to be very careful about the amount of sensory stimulation. This unit, Mitford Autism Unit in Northumberland, we designed is one example of carefully eliminating as many wall fittings and creating soft lighting, carefully orientating daylight and views, and eliminating as much of sense to reduce sensory overload. And then just wrapping up really, patient autonomy, really important that the patient has a sense of control of their own environment. That might be a sense of control of heating, which comes with its own challenges. It might be a sense of control of being able to go outdoors on their own or open a window on their own. But to be able to control your environment when perhaps your freedom of movement might be reduced is we found very important. So last section from me before I hand over to Mark, just a few pointers, and this is just a sort of starter for 10, which is opportunities from a services point of view, where things might be improved in terms of improving the patient environment. One aspect we think there's a great opportunity is lighting. Far too often we find in healthcare spaces lighting is designed to achieve a certain lux, and that's fair enough. But I think we can go much further to create a landscape of lighting, soft lighting. The image on the left is a mental health unit. The image on the right isn't. Admittedly, it's a hotel. But what's to say we couldn't aspire to something as high quality as this, to create a calm space where patients and staff feel valued. Acoustics, real challenge, as well as environments being quite hard environments because surfaces need to be robust. The last sort of space where a surface can be a bit softer is the ceiling. So let's do as much as we can there. But what else can we do? Can we integrate speakers in ceilings? One source of anxiety and escalation in mental health units is this muffled sound from TVs. And what can we do? Can we? You can see here casing around a TV to protect it, but that has this secondary effect of muffling the sound from that TV, despite the shrouding with vents within it. So how can we integrate services to allow service users a better experience? And there's other considerations. Far too often I go onto mental health wards, doors are held open and alarms are going off. Everyone's ignoring them. What can we do to eliminate unnecessary noise, the slam of maglocks, excuse me. And then just wrapping up, heating challenges. It is a challenge to heat mental health environments. We tend to design with underfloor heating, and that comes with its own challenges in terms of the lag time that a space needs to heat up. And we do need to design in this day and age spaces that are flexible for the future. The image on the left is an example of an underfloor heating screed being dug up to enable a reconfiguration of an existing mental health unit, and the amount of screed was eye-watering that filled skips. So this is a call to really, when we design units, to allow for flexibility, particularly I'd say if considering underfloor heating, designing perhaps to a modular system that allows for partitions to be added or removed in the future with ease. There are alternatives. The image in the middle is from Broadmoor High Secure unit, where ceiling mounted radiant panels were installed that did have a ligature risk, but were installed above 3 meters within the bedroom. So it was deemed there was a diminished sense of risk. And of course, more traditional wall-mounted radiant panels, such as on the right, which are more responsive, and that's terrific, but careful consideration about access, particularly to pipes, potential form of ligature. In this case, there's a steel screen with perforations less than 2 mil, which means that from a ligature point of view, that seems to be safe, but that needs careful thought in terms of being able to clean that space. There are circumstances where a patient may soil something like that, and a vent would need cleaning and taking apart. So it certainly needs careful consideration. One last thought is how we integrate technology. On the left is an example of, we've noticed recently in the last couple of years, number of wards allowing use of personal mobile phones. But with that comes cables, with that comes potential ligature. So these things are handed over to a member of staff, and this is a great source of anxiety amongst patients, that they either might not get their phone back, or they might not get their charger or charging cable back, which sounds like a small thing, but it's a source of tension, anxiety, and potentially escalation. More and more we're seeing, for example, on trains, contact chargers. Let's think about how we might integrate services to make the user experience better. So that's me done. I'm going to hand over to Mark now.
Can I just add in between? If anyone's got any questions, if they drop them in the chat box, we'll hopefully pick them up later.
Hi, so I'm Mark Richardson. What I want to talk today about is a service user approach to zero carbon. So in mental health facilities, as Rory has just outlined, there's lots of different challenges, but the commonality amongst these challenges is that it's a patient-first approach, it's a recovery-first approach. That's got to be the focus of everything. There are these overwhelming global challenges such as net zero carbon and climate change that must be looked at, but we really must put the service users first. So I'm just going to zoom out a lot. So this is a day-ahead cost for electricity contracts from 2020 through to last year, and you can see there's getting close to a tenfold change in the cost of electricity. This is very, very volatile. So my only comment here is, if you want to reduce the risk around price spikes, just use less energy in the first place. Design for minimal energy usage, and you can minimize your risk there. Okay, so Treat by Wards and Anders, we're a building services consultancy. We've been around for over 60 years now, and we actually started out in healthcare, and we're one of the biggest healthcare building services consultants in the UK. We are UK focused consultancy. I would say, though, that as a business, our passion is to do very good buildings, but it also is looking at society and growing people, putting people through apprenticeships, really working with industry to bring skills into the market. And I'll say our passions are probably evenly split between education and delivering buildings in that respect. So it's good to be here today to help educate industry from that point of view. Okay. So net zero carbon, I'm not going to go into the details of what this means, but the NHS has put together a brilliant standard now that sets out for new builds and for major refurbishments what a net zero carbon building looks like. And this came into force last October. So we all need to follow this guideline now. And I think the projects we're seeing now is the first wave of where we need to comply with this document. So this is going to affect us all. But then in the back of our minds, service user first approach. So this presentation was formulated on the back of a few designing mental health conferences over the last few years. And at these conferences, there are some really emotional and evocative presentations from ex-service users and many, many conversations we had. And there's a recurrent theme in all these conversations was that the physical environment within a mental health facility had a dramatic impact, and often, unfortunately, in a negative sense on recovery and escalation events. One example that really stuck to my mind was around odour. And one of the ex-service users who'd unfortunately had to go through facilities several times in their life said that as soon as they walked into any facility, there was almost a standard smell. And that was synonymous with them as, oh my God, I've got to go through this again. Kind of, and that instant smell, that evocative reaction was just heartbreaking for this particular person. So with my building services engineer hat on, I was like, hang on a minute, odour as a result of ventilation. You know, we can do something about that. If we can make that one person's life better through getting ventilation right, we're on to a winner. So this is where this thought and this piece of research was kind of born from. So I'm going to go back to the standard room. So the standard room was developed as part of the Procure framework in 2014, and it was signed off by the Department of Health. And it's a very good idea. It enabled efficient delivery from a commercial program and operational point of view. Fantastic. And it works well. But we wanted to ask the question, is there anything we can do to the standard room to make that patient environment better? I'm not going to run through the parameters of the standard room in any detail, but one point I will pick out is that there's a balanced supply extract within the space of 17 litres per second. This is constant volume. The user doesn't have any control over that. If there's an event, there's a soiling event, someone vomits, they can't ramp up that ventilation to get rid of that odour quickly. It's quite prescriptive in terms of the building services. So when we look at environmental parameters within a space, there's a number of different elements that can affect a person. There's artificial lighting, there's natural lighting, there's sunlight, there's ventilation, there's temperature, there's humidity, and all these have a physiological response to people. Very simply, I'm sure we've all sat in an office next to somebody who likes a completely different temperature to be comfortable than we do. And this can lead to not quite physical arguments in the workplace, but definitely people not wanting to sit in certain seats because the person next to them likes a temperature of 28 degrees in winter. But it really is important. It really does affect your day-to-day well-being, the physical environment of a building. As building service engineers, we are the people who control this. Let's zoom into a couple. So the standard room gives an average daylight factor of over 4. Fantastic. I'm not going to argue to increase it past 4 because that's going to have unwanted effects such as increased solar gain. I would say that with an average daylight factor of 4, careful choice of blinds, etc., and glare control is absolutely essential, because you will have glare with that average daylight factor. So when we look at the artificial lighting now, in recent years, we have variable colour temperature lighting or circadian lighting that's come on the market. A little bit less efficient than a normal light fitting, but it enables you to vary the colour temperature of a light across a period of time. Typically, it matches to the natural rhythm of the day. A nice, bright, awakening blue light in the morning, a more sombre, relaxed red light in the evening. And having that control in a space would better link that patient to the natural environment. It would likely have really positive benefits on their recovery, and also their personal choice as well. You know, some people like a certain colour temperature of light, and taking that one step further, also the lux level. You know, can we increase from the 300 lux to have a variable choice to have 600 lux? With certain patients in the mental environment, having a very bright light to almost wash everything out is actually what some people want. So we need to think variable. We need to think about every person has different desires. A certain environment's going to get somebody over a hump where it might not get somebody else over a hump. We shouldn't be so prescriptive. So ventilation design. We're currently at 17 litres per second. What if we just doubled that to 34 on a variable control? This would help us remove gases such as carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds, NOx and SOx, etc. So these are all removed from buildings via dilution via the ventilation system, not via filtration typically. If you look at 17 litres per second, it actually controls CO2 to a good level, 600 parts per million. I'm not saying we should try to get CO2 down to the 450 external condition, but that doesn't account for other chemicals in the air. It's a proxy that often used in building services design. Let's look at CO2 and VOC will follow, SOx and NOx will follow. But does it really? And when you have service users in environments saying the odour in these places is terrible, it very clearly doesn't track very well to CO2, odour and VOCs. Odour is associated primarily with VOCs. So doubling that could dramatically improve the odour in spaces. We've had a whole new raft of filtration standards and designs in Europe in recent years, but it's fair to say that if you're designing in an urban context with outdoor pollution, the fresh air you're bringing in, particularly at higher ventilation rates, let's actually filter that properly, filter it appropriate to the outdoor pollution conditions. Let's not have a one size fits all. If we're going to HEPA level of filtration, that's not going to be appropriate if you're in a country environment, miles from a bus lane. If you're in an urban environment, perhaps HEPA is the right way forward. And control. Let's enable users to have control. Enable them to open a window. If you do have an odour in a space, opening a window is a physical action you can take to get rid of that odour. It might not actually get rid of the odour, but actually taking the action that you can control to do it has a very strong psychological effect. So, enhanced temperature and humidity design. I'm going to jump ahead and say humidity design. Let's not focus on that in the moment. It's kind of it's an energy complex issue, but temperature is very, very important in today's world. Temperatures are getting hotter each year. We've just gone through the hottest year on record in the UK again. I don't know how many years in a row that's happened. It's fair to say the buildings that we design today, that should be lasting for at least 60 years, if not 100 or 200 years. They're going to be operating in climates that are far, far hotter. Currently, within the room, we're allowed to have temperatures over 28 degrees for 50 hours a year. So it's typically going to happen for an hour or so in the afternoon, that peak. So it's almost 2 months throughout the summer period where every day you're going to be over 28 degrees. If you actually sit in a room with a thermometer and note when it gets to 28 degrees, it's uncomfortable, you can't concentrate. It's not a pleasant place to be. So every day throughout summer, that could happen. So adding full mechanical cooling, perhaps that is a solution we should be looking at. Yes, there's an energy impact, I know, but cooling is getting more and more efficient. A well-designed cooling system, you might even be seeing a COP up towards 10, 11, 12 nowadays. So let's actually focus at this as a solution if that's going to make people's summertime better. I'm not going to go through this table, it's just a summation of what I talked about. Okay, so that's all great, isn't it? We can do this service, we can do this in enhanced service. What would that mean in terms of carbon emissions? We've got to design in a carbon conscious fashion today. So doing some energy modelling based on the standard room, we see that actually in a standard room, the majority of energy is on domestic hot water. No surprise there. And when you get to the cooling, the heating, etc., it's less. But actually, if you look at things like increased lighting through to increased temperature control, which includes cooling, the increase in energy consumption is not huge. And considering the improvement in environment we're giving people to aid their recovery. But Service user rooms are only a small part of the facility. What opportunities are there to offset the higher energy use within a room across the rest of the building? So I've looked at typical base cases and good practice base cases taken from CIBSE Guide F, and we can see a typical base case for this type of room is about 500 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year, and a good practice one is just under 300. If we look towards a net zero carbon standard, net zero carbon alignment, we're down at around about 60, 70-ish kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. It's a big drop in energy. And if we put those best-in-class enhanced service provision into there, we would be getting up to 80, 90. So we can see that from typically what we're doing today, down to what we could be at or should be at for net zero carbon, adding a bit better provision, we are still taking out a humongous amount of energy from these facilities. So I think there's very real scope to look at enhanced provision based on that. Just as a point of note, I put some pink numbers vertically here. This is the cost to run a facility, a 1,000 square meter facility for a year. So typically it could be 75 to 175,000. That could drop all the way down with enhanced provision to around about 12,000 to 28,000 pounds per year. So net zero carbon doesn't need to cost the earth. I've talked a little bit about the net zero carbon standard at the moment, so I'm not going to dwell too much on this other than to say that this covers new mental health facilities as it does any other healthcare development. And it's based on years and years of rational engineering thought. It's a very good standard. I wholeheartedly I helped review it, but you won't be any surprised to hear it looks at be lean, so use less energy, design that building so it actually works with passive design. Get the controls in that building right, and then be clean. So use heat pumps or use electric heating equivalents, whatever may be appropriate for the building. Let's get away from fossil fuels, please. Before looking at renewable energy, if we're talking about a typical facility of single story building, the energy density of that space per plot area is relatively small. It's ideal for roof mounted renewables. And finally, perhaps there will be a need to offset as a transitionary step towards a net zero carbon future. I'm not an end game of offsetting is not what I'm advocating for here, but it is I believe a necessary step to get there. So as I mentioned before, there's no separate approach for mental health facilities, and it can easily be matched to the space type, etc. So please for all upcoming projects you have, look at this standard, get involved in it, get your net zero carbon coordinator employed at RIBA stage 1 or 2. Set this up, get that coordination going, and net zero carbon can happen. However, I'm going to caveat that by saying net zero carbon in design is not net zero carbon in operation. The two are completely different. And as an industry, we have a horrendous track record of actually handing over a building from design into operation. We've got to engage with the operations teams at day one, particularly in a facility like a mental health facility that's incredibly complex and driven by user needs to such a high degree. We've got to bring those people into the design conversation. Roy was mentioning about access to services. If a heating element breaks in a service room, you can't go to that person's room and fix the heating. That's just not appropriate. These types of operational parameters must be built in from day one. I'm not going to go through these in any detail other than to say, as you'd expect in a net zero carbon standard, there's a huge step from the standard Part L numbers to what you need to be aiming for as a minimum. and likewise for energy use indices around about 39 to 95 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. If you think back to what typically is being done, what good practice is anywhere between 300, 400, 500, we've got a way to go as industry to get down here. This is not just going to be one person who's going to achieve these values. It's got to be a collaborative approach across design and operations to get here. So that's everything for myself. I'm just going to close out by saying that providing the enhanced conditions for service users and for staff is a small increase in energy consumption compared to what we can reduce the overall building by good design. So we have scope here. The dice have rolled in our favour. There's something we can do. And anything around more complex elements of design, net zero carbon, mental health facilities, to very, very complex issues. From the project inception, from the earliest RIBA stages, there must be that collaborative design team in place to deliver. Yeah, we must design with controls and building management, building operations in mind at all time. Okay. So that is everything I was going to present for today. We have a few minutes for questions.
Do you want to pull up the chat box to see what questions may have come? Do controls have restrictions depending on time of day? So who can answer that one?
I'm going to suggest it's Mark.
Thank you, Rory. I was going to suggest it was you. In terms, I'm not quite sure what the question is getting at in terms of what should be specified or what's specified under the standard room. I'm not 100% sure of the details of the specification under the standard room. Apologies, but the quality of lighting generally in specifications, flicker. Quite often, when people are experiencing mental health issues, they have a heightened sensory reaction to stimuli or to issues within the space around them. So if you're talking about a standard lighting spectrum that's not variable, you know, yes, a good quality mimicking full spectrum, I would assume would be good. Yeah, designing out things like flicker, of course, please. And with the time of day, there's a big move towards generally taking all the control of everything away from the people within the facilities. I believe we need to push back on that. And yes, things like time clocks are automated. They're great. It's carbon. You know, imagine me stuck in a room where the lights went off at 10 p.m. You know, this is not a prison. This is for somebody to recover in.
Okay, next one that's come up there now. Are there issues with service with users not using ensuite stroke washing, therefore resulting in water stagnation? I would think that's probably similar to what you just said, is that in terms of, you know, these are not prisons. We're trying to make these into domestic domestic-like institutions, and therefore they've got to have the freedom to do whatever they want to during their time.
Yeah. I could add to that.
Yeah.
So we've got done. So I'll try and sort. We've just got a slight glitch in the meeting. From the remote one. Okay, here we go. Yes, within healthcare environments, as I think probably the audience has got greater expertise than I do. Stagnant water is an issue, and unused spaces need to be flushed. As I understand it, the default is that there is a regimen of people going around flushing and turning taps on, which obviously sounds labour intensive. But at the same time, I don't expect you to have remembered, but on the in my presentation, there was a view of various fixtures and fittings available, controls within mental health environments. A number of these are remote controlled and not local, so that you can shut valves off remotely, not locally, from an ensuite. And I would imagine it's within the gift of these specialist suppliers or the consulting team to develop a more automated system of flushing rather than rely on.
Or if I could say, from being a director of stage and operating these facilities, well, the best thing to do is you risk assess what your patient is in there. If there isn't any great risk from Legionella or Pseudomonas from that patient, you leave it as it is, and they will be no more at home than if they were at home. Because the problem that we had that is when you do this automatic flushing, they panic because their tap suddenly starts running in the middle of the night or whatever it is, and it's more confusing than doing it. So it's a risk assessment process around what you're doing and the patient that you've got in there as to how you best handle it. A lot of the times, the flushing regime is not observed because there's little harm to the actual end patient user.
Yeah, thank you.
So another one, well, we've got a couple on ventilation. Why is the ventilation stipulated at 17 litres per second when the standard in Part F is 13 litres and 8 litres for an ensuite, totaling 21 litres? I mean, one of the things I always thought that in mental health units, there was a lot more of the natural ventilation design with the, like the Brit Plus safe vents and things like that. So is this actually supplied at 17 litres per second, are we saying?
From my understanding, it's mechanical supply at 17 litres per second. It wouldn't include the natural element to that. Unfortunately, there has been a move to kind of shut down rooms and have basically sealed environments, hermetically sealed environments, sorry. Yes, I can't speak to the details of the rationale behind the 17 litres, unfortunately.
But that's in the HBN, is it, or something like that?
Standard room design.
Standard room design. Okay. The next one was also to do with ventilation. Is the ventilation rates with respect to the transmission of infectious diseases during outbreaks, taking World Health Organization guidance into consideration, particularly during winter. So my understanding is that during the pandemic, there was an increase in COVID cases within mental health units, and there was a look to try and increase the ventilation rates within it. And has that been covered off anywhere yet? You know?
World Health Organisation minimum legally it's 12 litres a second. 12 litres a second.
12 litres.
So you're above that already.
Yeah. So that answers that one. How do we find the balance between the need to secure premises against unauthorised access and exit, and to ensure that people can escape easily in case of an emergency? All right.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, I think it's HTMO 502 fire codes, which is another bit of guidance that's being rewritten at the moment, is applicable to mental health as it is to acute hospitals, where a patient may not be able to freely move, whether they're in a bed or their restriction is not free. And so we design around safe compartments where rather than immediately escaping to a stairs, where someone can, or a group of patients can move sequentially horizontally before they exit the building. So that's what we tend to see in mental health design. And even when we design for scenarios where there's a muster point that's within a secure area, within a facility that's a safe distance from the building itself. So we tend to develop an escalating plan of escape. The initial phase alarms may not be, for example, audible to patients to avoid undue alarm so that they can be managed. I hope that answers your question, Dan.
The next one is about Brit Plus. Apparently, unable to meet Part LU values, let alone NZC targets. So that's interesting.
Well, I think but a lot of it is that there is a risk assessment on your patient cohort, and in a lot of these things, you'll have inundation systems within a portable inundation system within a room, so that you can do that. And with misting, there's very little water damage after the room, usually white with cloth. That greatly assists in what you can do for having to evacuate everybody.
Yeah, I think the challenge with mental health window manufacturers is creating robustness whilst creating that thermal bridge. And I'm sure Brit Plus and others are looking at this actively as the requirements change. If they don't necessarily meet exactly the requirements, I've seen U values improve in the windows available with the use of triple glazing, for example, or improvements. And sometimes it's about if the window can only perform up to a certain point, then it's about compensating that in the wall and the roof and the floor around that to get an overall composite U value that meets the target.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of the time it's the fenestra, it's the whole fenestration rather than just the window.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some really good sort of, where the window opens fully, but it opens onto a perforated grill mesh. So when the window's a window, it meets all its values.
Oh yeah.
So that's usually another way to do it.
Yeah.
So it's the whole fenestration rather than just the window assembly.
Yep. One question I had was, under the NHP, the famous NHP, are there any mental health units in that scheme?
Yes, there are. In fact, within the first and second cohorts, we delivered a handful. So they maybe they don't get quite the fanfare of the large new acute hospital, but yes, there have been and there are mental health projects within that 40-ish projects.
So is there an equivalent to Hospital 2.0 for mental health?
Well, we'll see. I've not read Hospital 2.0.
Is there a 2.0 yet?
No, we're waiting for that.
That's exactly.
Can I ask a quick question? On your 28 degrees over 50 hours, where's that come from?
I believe that's standard room specification.
Right, so it's because the HCM now removes all that. So it's all down to CIBSE weather data and thermal modelling. So I was just wondering where 20.
Well, that was the Procure 21 stuff. So it was there before that,
right?
Yeah.
Or 23 or whatever it was. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's questions from the whole of the audience. I'd just like to thank Rory and Mark for the presentation. Very well attended seminar today, 120 people. So that's really good. And thank you for attending, and hopefully see you at our next presentation.